Hey everyone, this is going to be my Spider-Man Brand New Day review. I'm going to share my full thoughts on the movie with all of you and be completely honest about whether I believe this movie is good and worthwhile, or a failure, or somewhere in between. Once you have seen the movie, join me as I discuss and we will decide together where in history this movie rightfully belongs. I hope you enjoy.
Jayvardy.
Jayvardy.
This Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Thank you, Jayvardy.
Jayvardy.
Jayvardy. Oh, Jayvardy! Oh my gosh.
Okay, so before I get into the full review of this movie, I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am as a Spider-Man fan and where I am before I see this movie and where I am heading into this movie. So this is my thoughts before the movie, and don't worry, everything's going to be time-stamped. So if you don't want to listen to this part, you can head to the comments where I'll pin a comment time-stamping the video, or you can just scroll through the bottom of the video. That should be time-stamped as well, and they're in the description if all else fails. But I want to talk about who I am as a Spider-Man fan and where I am heading into the movie and where I've been heading into this year before this movie has come out. So I'm recording this part on Wednesday, July 29th. I am seeing the movie on Thursday, July the 30th before its complete wide release on Friday, July 31st. But let's talk about my history as a Spider-Man fan. So it's important to note that I was born in the year 1990, and I have seen every single live action Spider-Man movie in theaters. I wish I could say I've seen every single Spider-Man movie, period, in theaters. I actually never saw Into the Spider-Verse in theaters. I did see Across the Spider-Verse in theaters, but not Into the Spider-Verse. I'm hoping to eventually catch Into the Spider-Verse on like one of those matinee days that movie theaters do where they play old movies, or if they ever re-release it before, Beyond the Spider-Verse or something. But anyways, I have seen every single live action Spider-Man movie in theaters, including the original release of Tobey Maguire's first movie in 2002. I was 11 years old when that came out because I'm born in December of 1990. So that came out summer of 2002. I would have been 11 years old at the time. And ever since, I have seen every single Spider-Man movie in theaters. And people would hear that and they go, "Oh, this is a Tobey Maguire fan. This is another Tobey Maguire fan coming at us with his thoughts on the new Spider-Man movie." Not really. My favorite Spider-Man is actually Andrew Garfield. I thought Andrew Garfield's version of the character was the best. I thought that in 2012 when The Amazing Spider-Man came out, I thought it was better than Tobey Maguire's right away. I still feel that to this day. Um, Andrew Garfield's an interesting Spider-Man at this stage because he always had his hardcore believers in him, but they were kind of a niche audience after The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And especially once Tom Holland debuted, they were a very niche group. But after No Way Home, it's kind of become a little bit popular on the internet to say Andrew Garfield's your favorite Spider-Man, but rest assured he was always my favorite Spider-Man, and I've defended that both in real life and online many, many times in my life. I've always felt that way. So despite me seeing every single Spider-Man movie in theaters, my favorite is actually Andrew Garfield and always has been. But I want to say that really, in all honesty, I'm a Spider-Man fan. To me, at this stage in my life, right now I'm 35 years old. I'm going to be 36 by the end of the year. I've really have experienced so many different times in terms of superheroes because I remember a world before the Marvel Cinematic Universe existed. I remember a world before Christopher Nolan's Nolanized Batman movies existed. Like when I was a kid, My favorite superhero movie was Batman Forever because that came out right when I was like a young kid, and I watched that movie on VHS so many times over and over and over again. But when I was a young kid, all we had were the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher Batman movies and the old Christopher Reeve Superman movies. And then, X-Men started to come out, and then Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man came out. And this to me was like, that was always what the superhero movies were for me before I was a teenager. It was, the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. It was the first two X-Men movies done by Fox. It was the Joel Schumacher Batmans and um, Tim Burton Batmans and the old Christopher Reeve Superman movies. That was to me like the superhero movies that existed when I was a kid. And then when I was a teenager, they started really coming out with more and more and more. And then, Christopher Nolan did The Dark Knight. Robert Downey Jr. did Iron Man, and that launched the MCU. And we've gotten to the point where there's dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of superhero movies. But for me, I'm a Spider-Man and Batman fan, and I think that's pretty typical of most millennial men. I think most millennial men, you ask them who their favorite superhero is, they're going to say one of Spider-Man or Batman, and they might say it's a tie between the two, and that's kind of where I am. And the point I'm bringing all this up is I'm not an MCU fan per se. I've seen a lot of the MCU movies, most of them, not every single one. I feel like the MCU is really for Gen Z and for young millennials, like millennials born in like 95, 96, and I was born in 1990. But like that's who I feel it's really for because if you're a 1996 millennial, the first movie in the MCU came out when you were 12, right? Like the first MCU movie came out for me when I was like 17 already. So like, at this point, I didn't really care all that much. Like I already had my childhood when it came to superhero movies. I still like them. I still watch them. Like I'm going to see Spider-Man by myself as a 35-year-old tomorrow, right? But the point I'm making is I'm a Spider-Man and I'm a Batman fan, and I've never been a massive fan of the MCU. And Andrew Garfield is my favorite Spider-Man, so I've never been a massive fan of Tom Holland. And I'm going to get into all of that why before I get to the review. But at this point in my life, I really do feel like the only two characters I care about are Spider-Man and Batman. I will probably never go to a superhero movie that doesn't have one of those two characters in it in theaters again. It's just very unlikely unless I have kids. That's literally the only way it'll happen. But for me, as an adult going out to superhero movies, I'm only going to go to movies that have Spider-Man or Batman in the title, or they're part of like a Justice League or Avengers movie. Otherwise, I will only watch these movies on stream or on rental or on home media release of some kind, but I will not go to the theaters. I will only go to the theaters for Spider-Man and Batman because for me, they're the only two characters that really matter. And in that sense, I'm very excited for this movie, but in another sense, this is the Spider-Man movie I'm the least excited about in my life, with the exception of perhaps Far From Home. I feel like Far From Home was the movie I was the least hyped about ever for a Spider-Man movie before this because I didn't love Spider-Man Homecoming. I hadn't loved Tom Holland as Spider-Man up to that point, and it was in the midst of like at that point feeling like I'll probably never see Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man again. I'll probably never see Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man again, even though I did feel deep down there was always a chance they would do some sort of Spider Verse movie, um, especially with Into the Spider Verse. I believe Into the Spider Verse came out this. It was either the year before or the year after Far From Home. I can't remember at the top off the top of my head. I think it was the year before, right? Because didn't Into the Spider Verse come out in 2018 and Far From Home was 2019? I think so. I can't remember. But anyways, not to get lost in a tangent on that. But I was not super excited about Far From Home. And turns out I had no real reason to be because that's probably the worst Spider-Man movie that's been made. But this is with the exception of probably Far From Home, which I had almost no hype for at all, this is the one I'm feeling like I feel like I don't have a ton of hype for this movie. And I want to say that I'm going into this movie completely knowing as little as I possibly can. First of all, I haven't read any reviews. Reviews are probably starting coming out tonight. I haven't read a single one. I'm not going to read a single one. I haven't watched any of the trailers or TV spots. I've completely avoided them on purpose because I wanted to see no footage. I wanted to go into this movie having seen no footage. So I haven't read any reviews. I haven't seen any of the trailers, and I'm not going to. And I haven't read any rumors. I've been avoiding rumors of what this movie could be about as much as I possibly could. That said, I'm not going into it completely unknowing. Like there are things that have gotten to me. Like I do scroll, online, and there are, channels I watch, movie channels and all that, like movie news channels and movie rumor channels, etc. So over the last year, like I have gotten information about this movie, and there's clearly the poster is in the background right now. So I've seen that poster, and Zendaya's in the poster. So it's not like I'm going into this completely unknowing. But even going into the movie knowing as little as I possibly can, I'm just like I just don't feel a ton of hype for this movie. Um, like personally. And just looking at the world around me, I don't really see a ton of hype. Certainly not to the levels of No Way Home. Like I don't think we'll ever see a Spider-Man movie have that kind of hype heading into it ever again. That was an event movie, and that's an event movie that's probably never going to be repeated in the Spider-Man franchise. But in my entire life, I feel like Brand New Day and Far From Home, like they're probably the two most least hyped Spider-Man movies for me personally. And Brand New Day might be the least hyped Spider-Man movie culturally, like probably in my lifetime. I think so, anyways, because obviously the first Spider-Man movie was historic and there was a ton of hype heading into that. And then the sequel, obviously, we had massive hype. Spider-Man 3 because of how good the second one was. The Amazing Spider-Man had a ton of hype because people were curious to see what would be different with the reboot. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 had a lot of hype because it had a really, really solid marketing. Its marketing was all over the place. Homecoming, again, people were curious, especially after Civil War, but Brand New Day, I think Far From Home culturally probably had a lot of hype because of Endgame. It was coming off of Endgame, and I think that's actually why it made the bulk of its money because it was the first movie to follow Avengers Endgame. But, anyways, the point is, I feel like this movie doesn't have a ton of hype, and that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. It could be a bad thing in I'm not heading into this movie overly excited. And the fact that I'm not overly excited, I'm not going to be counting down the minutes tonight. It's not like I'm going to be able to not sleep tonight because this movie's coming up tomorrow. I'm going to sleep just fine tonight. So I'm not heading into the movie in like the complete best mood, and that can work against the movie. But where it can work in favor of the movie is it has the opportunity to really kind of surprise, right? Like it has the opportunity to be a great movie kind of out of nowhere. So we'll see how it goes, but I want to talk a little bit about the history of Tom Holland's Spider-Man and why I'm not the biggest fan of this version of the character. First of all, I mentioned that I'm not an MCU guy. Never really have been. I've seen most of the movies and I've seen, a handful of them in theaters even, but I'm not a huge MCU guy. And the biggest criticism I have of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies is they just feel like MCU movies more than they feel like Spider-Man movies. You know what I mean? Like they feel like they're MCU movies first and Spider-Man movies second. And I mean that both tonally and how they're presented and like the formulas that they follow. Um, but he doesn't really stand out compared to the rest of the Marvel characters, and he never really has. Like, you go back to Captain America Civil War, and I think the introductory scene of Peter Parker with Tony Stark is really good. I think that's a really good introduction scene of the character, actually, especially since, this is not his movie, but we're getting to meet this character in the midst of this other movie, and this is all set up, right? It's for set up later in the movie when we see Spider-Man, but it's also set up for the future of this character in this universe. And I thought the introductory scene of Peter Parker in Civil War was great. I thought the introductory scene of Spider-Man as part of that airport battle is kind of weak. I didn't think that at the time when I first saw it in theaters. Like, I actually quite enjoyed it, but over the years going back to that scene, the thing that stands out to me is that he doesn't really stand out. His colorful costume does not necessarily stand out compared to everyone else. Like, he just looks like, we have Iron Man and Captain America there who are wearing these heavily comic influenced costumes themselves, right? So he doesn't really stand out in that regard. But also, you listen to how all the characters talk to one another in that scene, and even the way that Spider-Man talks is not very it's not very unique because they're all kind of joking with one another. They're all kind of bantering with one another. They're all kind of feeding off of each other's lines and all these things that you would expect Spider-Man to do, but when every other character in the scene is doing it, it doesn't allow him to really stand out that much. I think the only thing that really stands out about him in that scene is that he's very clearly younger than everybody else because of how he's reacting to everything around him. But in terms of, the things he's actually saying and how he's saying them, it's not unique at all because he's in this battle where every single character is talking like that. And that's why I can't stand that scene anymore, because to me, that scene was about, okay, you got to further the plot of this movie, but this is also Black Panther and Spider-Man's time to shine. And while Black Panther does shine in that scene because he's the only character in the scene taking the scene seriously, everybody else is like taking the scene as a big joke, right? And Spider-Man kind of leans towards that in that scene. And he doesn't really stand out, but it's tying back to what I was saying about how these all his movies feel like they're MCU movies first and not Spider-Man movies first. Now I was talking about Civil War there, but I feel that way about his movies too. Not only because they're filled with MCU cameos all the time, and the fact that he hasn't had a single movie where he stands alone as a character. I think his movies do a fine job of, letting him be the main character in his adventures, but he just feels like, first of all, in Homecoming and Far From Home, it feels like the plots of those movies don't really matter at the end of the day. They're both kind of filler movies. They're nothing overly important happens in those movies, like in terms of plot. Um, so it's not even like he's given these amazing plots to work with, but just tonally and where he stands as a character in terms of his uniqueness, he just feels more like Spider-Man of the MCU rather than the straight up bona fide Spider-Man, if that makes sense. Where 616 Spider-Man in the comics does not feel that way. He doesn't feel like the Spider-Man of the Marvel Comics universe. He just feels like the true Spider-Man. And I've never gotten that feel out of Tom Holland. I've never gotten the feel that this is the most important Spider-Man we've ever gotten. He just feels like the Spider-Man of this particular superhero universe. That's always how he's felt to me. And I think that's more on how those movies present him and present themselves. Um, and just how that character is written throughout his appearances in Captain America: Civil War and the two Avenger movies he's been in up to this point. Um, it didn't feel like he really stepped into being an important Spider-Man until No Way Home, and I'll get to No Way Home in a bit, but the first thing that I always think of why I'm not a fan of Spider-Man, not to repeat myself, but it's to end this point, is his movies feel like MCU movies more than they feel like Spider-Man movies. They feel like they belong more with the Marvel Cinematic Universe group of movies than they do like the Spider-Man franchise movies, if that makes sense. One of the things that contributes to that is Tom's lack of character development through these movies. And you look at Tom Holland's character from where he comes in Civil War or at the beginning of Spider-Man Homecoming, which is his first movie as the title character, all the way to the end of No Way Home, through all six of his movie appearances. His character hasn't really developed. He doesn't have this natural progression as a person to me. He has experienced a lot in these six movies, but his character development has been very minimal. There's nothing that Tom Holland's Spider-Man does in Spider-Man No Way Home that I don't feel like he would have done exactly the same in Spider-Man Homecoming. You know what I mean? His character doesn't feel like it's evolved at all. Every decision he makes in virtually every movie he's in feels entirely consistent to a small period of time that where it doesn't matter which movie you take him in. You take him out of Civil War and put him in No Way Home. It feels like everything he does in No Way Home would be exactly the same. You take the No Way Home version of where he is and you put him in Spider-Man Homecoming, it feels like he would do everything the same and nothing would be different. There's been no real character development in terms of, his decision making, who he is as a man, how he handles the situations in front of him. Nothing feels like it's developed at all. Or at very least has very minimal development. Um, you look at this is not from the Spider-Man franchise, but I want to use a character that has had four movies as well. I want to look at the Lethal Weapon movies for a second. You look at Mel Gibson's character in Lethal Weapon 1 versus Mel Gibson's character in Lethal Weapon 4, completely different. Completely, utterly different. The decision making is completely different. His actions are completely different, and how he handles situations in front of him are completely different because there's been a natural progression of his character over the course of four movies. We're introduced to him as a lonely, suicidal, depressed man who is not afraid to die, who is constantly putting himself in, death's door, sort of say, and if he happens to step through it, it doesn't really matter to him because, he has if anybody hasn't seen the Lethal Weapon movies, you might want to skip this part, but his wife died and he doesn't care if he dies and goes and joins her. He doesn't care. Um, where at the end of Lethal Weapon 4, he no longer is suicidal. He is no longer lonely. He is no longer depressed. And he is no longer willingly putting himself in positions where he might die. In fact, he's very careful to avoid those things because he has a new wife. He has friends and family that cares about him, and he has a baby on the way. But it's not just those plot things that changes the situation for him. It's this natural development because of the plot, because of all the things that have happened to him, because of the relationships he's built through these plots, that he as a man is completely different. His mannerisms are different. How he talks is different. How he walks is different. That's a guy with four movies. Mel Gibson's character, Sergeant Riggs, Lethal Weapon 1 to Lethal Weapon 4. You put in Lethal Weapon 1, you put in Lethal Weapon 4, they feel like a completely different man. Should I expect Tom Holland's version already to be completely different. Maybe not completely different, but I really believe that if you take Tom Holland's character from No Way Home and put him in Homecoming, nothing would be different. And vice versa. You take out the Homecoming Tom Holland and put him in No Way Home, nothing would be different. A lot of things have happened to this character, and it feels like nothing has really changed him. And we'll get to No Way Home, because we will get to No Way Home. But there's been this lack of character development through 6 movies. Because remember, Tom Holland has been in 6 movies, not 3. He's been in 6 before Brand New Day. And it feels like a lot has happened to him plot wise, but he hasn't really developed or changed as a man. He hasn't gone from being a boy to a man. We'll get to No Way Home's ending. But you talk about how Tom Holland has had a lack of character development. Ned, his best friend and sidekick through these movies, has had zero development. Absolutely zero character development. Zero. You take Ned from Spider-Man Homecoming and Ned from Spider-Man No Way Home, they're the exact same character. 100% the exact same. He has had zero character development. Zero whatsoever. The character with the most development in the Tom Holland trilogy has been Zendaya's Michelle Jones. You take Michelle Jones in Spider-Man Homecoming and Michelle Jones from Spider-Man No Way Home, she's the character that has evolved the most. She's the character that has had the most character development. First of all, she doesn't just cast everything aside in a joking kind of nihilistic manner like she did in Spider-Man Homecoming. In Spider-Man Homecoming, she's this like secluded, emo, nihilistic, Joker. Nothing matters. She doesn't care about anything. She can laugh everything off, and she's just there for a laugh. In Spider-Man No Way Home, she actually cares about things. Things happen that she cares about. You know, it matters to her that she didn't get into university. It matters to her that everyone hates her boyfriend. It matters to her that her best friends aren't getting into university. It matters to her that these characters from these other universes are here, and if they are sent back to their worlds, they're going to die. It matters to her that her boyfriend's aunt dies in the middle of the movie. All these things matter to her, and all these things are affecting her and affecting how she behaves around them. In Spider-Man Homecoming, nothing affected her. Nothing changed how she reacted to things around her. She didn't care. She was nihilistic and she didn't care. By Spider-Man No Way Home, she has this new sense of maturity and this connection to the world around her that she simply didn't have in Spider-Man Homecoming, both in terms of the writing, but also in character performance, because Zendaya is the best actor of the three. No, if anyone disagrees with that, you're simply wrong. When it comes to Jacob, Tom Holland, and Zendaya, Zendaya is very clearly the best actor of the three. It's not really debatable. You look at their performances inside these movies, but just look at their careers as a whole. She is very clearly the best actor of the three. But I feel like her character, in terms of the writing of the character, but also in terms of her performance, is the character that's most developed. But it shouldn't be. She's not the main character. She's the supporting character. Tom Holland's character has had minimal character development. Jacob's character, Ned, who was a much larger character in Homecoming than Zendaya's Michelle Jones was, has had zero character development. And Zendaya, who was a very small role in Homecoming and who's had her role progressively increase with each movie, she's actually had the most character development. And that's a good thing in terms of her character, but it's a bad thing in terms of, Tom Holland's character, who is, the title character of these movies, right? In terms of his relationship with Ned and May and Michelle Jones, Tom Holland's character has had very minimal conflict with those characters. And, all of the conflict that Tom Holland's had in the Spider-Man trilogy thus far has been, it's all been very minimal inner conflict and kind of stupid external conflict that doesn't really matter. He hasn't had any very serious conflicts with the people around him that matter to him, and he hasn't had any meaningful conflict in the world around him that has, you know, real stakes for anyone over the age of 16. So I'm going to compare him to Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man in a second, but before I do that, I want to talk about how this lack of conflict with the characters around him has been kind of appalling in a sense, because if you don't have conflict with the characters around you, then the relationships between the characters are very phony. And that's how it feels with Tom Holland's relationship with his aunt, with his girlfriend, and with his best friend through these movies. It feels very phony in a sense that he never has serious conflicts with any of them. And you look at his relationship with Ned. In the first movie, Ned finds out that Peter is Spider-Man. And he comes up with this plan of, hey, we should reveal that you're Spider-Man, or you should come to this party as Spider-Man and build, us up. Build us up so we're not made fun of all the time. Why don't you come to this party as Spider-Man and act like my best friend so I don't get made fun of by everybody at school anymore? And what does Tom Holland's Spider-Man do when that party happens? He abandons Ned. He completely abandons him. And does Ned get mad and say, hey, like, what the F? You abandoned me, and, like, I'm still a loser. I'm still getting made fun of. You were supposed to come as Spider-Man, so I didn't get made fun of anymore. Does he get mad and be like, what the hell's your problem, bro? No, he doesn't. Okay, that's the first kind of thing. Maybe, he lets that slide. At the end of the movie, when he's helping him as the guy in the chair and he gets busted by the teacher, he has to embarrass himself and lie by saying, oh, I'm watching porn. How humiliating is that? I know that's supposed to be a comedy moment of the movie, but how humiliating is that for Ned to do that? Does he go to Peter later and be like, hey, like, I totally got humiliated back there, covering for you. I had to humiliate myself and lie to one of our teachers saying I was watching porn. Um, yeah, like I'm kind of ticked off with you. Does he confront Peter about that? Does he hold that against him? No, he doesn't, because there can't possibly be conflict between two best friends, right? Okay, you go to Far From Home. What happens? Ned and Peter, they're on this European trip. They're supposed to be having the time of their high school lives. It's going to be the only time that them and all their classmates leave the actual country together as classmates. They're going on this trip, and Ned is he's getting close with Betty. He's even developing this relationship with Betty, and him and Peter are sharing a room. And what happens? Ned gets shot unconscious by Nick Fury. Again, this is supposed to be a comedy moment in the movie, but do you think Ned goes to Peter after and be like, "Hey, like, what the f was that? I just got shot out cold on um, on this trip of ours. Nick Fury shot me with a dart, and I literally went out cold, and you did nothing. You didn't even stick around to make sure I was okay. You didn't even stick around to make sure I woke up. What the hell's wrong with you? I woke up on the floor, and I had to piece together by myself that frickin' Nick Fury shot me with a sleep dart. Where were you? Why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you help me? Is that held against Peter? No, of course not. And then in No Way Home, when Spider-Man is literally the reason that Ned doesn't get accepted to university, does he go like, hey, like, I've been your best friend and look at what this has gotten me. I'm not getting it into university now. What the hell am I supposed to tell my parents? What am I supposed to do with my life? It's your fault that I didn't get into university. Do you think Ned holds this against Peter? Do you think there's any conflict between them? No, of course not. Why would there be conflict between them over that? Instead, Ned is going to happily help Peter solve the problem. There's absolutely zero conflict between, and this goes for pretty much all the characters in Tom Holland's life. He never has any serious conflict with any of them. With Zendaya, she had a small role in Homecoming, But do you think in Far From Home, when he's all of a sudden in love with her now? Because let's not forget, in Spider-Man Homecoming, Tom Holland's Peter Parker was not in love with Zendaya, with Zendaya's Michelle Jones. He was in love with Liz. He was in love with Liz. And do you think that Michelle Jones in Far From Home goes, hey, so you only like me now because Liz moved away. I'm your second choice, huh? So yeah, this this gift that you want to give me, why don't you toss it in the ocean and go F yourself? Does she do that? No, because there can't possibly be conflict between them. Tom Holland's character can't possibly have conflict between him and the woman that he loves. In No Way Home, when she, who was likely to get a scholarship to one of these universities, her only chance of getting in was to get a scholarship. And Spider-Man causes her to not only not get those scholarships, but to be completely rejected from all these universities and blacklisted from all these universities to begin with. Does she start any conflict with him? Does she break up with him? No, of course not. Because there can't possibly be conflict between her and Spider-Man. She can't possibly, Tom Holland's Peter Parker can't possibly have conflict with the woman that he loves. It doesn't matter that she's his second choice. It doesn't matter that he caused her to simply not get it, to not get into university at all when, hey, she finally had this opportunity and hey, she's starting to have this dream about getting into school too. And he's the reason she doesn't get in. Now, some people would say, well, they're in love with each other. Okay, but how come Ned doesn't start conflict with him then? It should be one or the other. There's literally two characters there. He caused two people to not get into school. Neither of them start conflict with him? Are you kidding me? That's unacceptable. It should be one supports him and sticks with him, probably Michelle, and one starts conflict with him and blames him for ruining their life, probably Ned. But it has to be one or the other, and instead they do neither. Neither. And with Aunt May, Peter and all of his shenanigans in Homecoming, um, and him lying to her, does that cause any conflict? No. She begs him to tell him what's going on with him, and he cries and says, um, I got fired from the Stark internship. And then all of a sudden, her conflict with him disappears because, oh, you got fired. Oh, poor baby. And then at the end of the movie, when she finds out he's Spider-Man and he's been lying to her, is there any lasting conflict from that? No. In Far From Home, she's using him as a mascot for the place she works, and she's literally high-fiving him. There's never any conflict between him and the characters around him. It's ridiculous. And in No Way Home, when he hears from all these bad guys that he has no idea they're bad guys really. All he knows is that these characters have had problems with Spider-Man in their universe, and when they first saw him, they mistook him for their Spider-Man and thus had problems with him. But he finds out that in their universe, some of these guys were killed by Spider-Man. Do you think he has conflict with the Peter Parkers that show up when he finds out, when he comes face to face with the people that he thinks and he believes are responsible for killing some of these people? No, there's no conflict. He yells at them for like 30 seconds and says he's going to send them home. But then all of a sudden they say, oh, like Uncle Ben died in our world too, and then thus all is forgiven. And some people would say, well, no one really wanted to see the Spider-Mans fighting with each other. We wanted to see them as friends. Yeah, but you needed to have the conflict first. That's why No Way Home should have probably been an hour longer than it was, because we should have seen them fighting before they became friends. Listen, we all love the parts of them being friends, but we needed to see the conflict before they became friends. And they completely skipped over that. And so he never has conflict with the people around him. But let's think about this too. He never really has conflict in the world around him either. At the end of Far From Home, it's exposed that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And What happens? Oh, he doesn't get into university and his friends don't get into university. And he has all these charges against him. He has murder charges potentially from Quentin Beck dying. He potentially is being charged with murder. But then Daredevil comes in and is like, oh yeah, all those charges, yeah, they're gone. What? Just because freaking Daredevil comes in and is like, yeah, all those charges, they're gone. Do you see what I mean? There's never any consequences for this guy. There's never any real conflict for this guy. You know, there's this saying that every action has a reaction, thus every action has a consequence. And the consequences that this character faces through most of his movies are very trivial and they don't really matter. And they're very dumb and very stupid. He never has any conflicts with, you know, the people around him that matter to him. And he never has any conflict with the world around him that actually matters. Like the biggest moment of conflict that he faces in the movies before Aunt May's death in No Way Home is getting fired by Tony Stark. But literally, who cares? Who cares? That's not a defining moment in a person's life. Every teenager gets fired from an internship or a job at some point. And yeah, you can learn some lessons from that. But even by the end of that movie, that conflict's resolved and there's no lasting consequences where that's not the case for Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Both of them have consequences that are permanent. You know, Tom Holland got fired by um, Tony Stark in Homecoming, and then Tony Stark wanted him to join the Avengers by the end of the movie. There's no lasting conflict there. There's no lasting consequence there. Where Tobey Maguire, Uncle Ben's death, directly his fault. Andrew Garfield, Uncle Ben's death, directly his fault. Lasting consequences that we see both of them face for the rest of their time as these characters, still to this day. Um, Tobey Maguire, even if he's making the right decisions in the first Spider-Man movie, he is still responsible for Norman Osborn's death, and thus he's responsible for his best friend Harry completely hating Spider-Man, and when he finds out that Peter is Spider-Man, completely hating him. I'm not saying that Tobey Maguire was making bad decisions in the first movie, but even the results of good actions can have consequences. And while he did not kill Norman Osborn, he is directly responsible for Norman's death. Norman would not have died if he was not fighting Spider-Man. So thus, Spider-Man is at least partly responsible for Green Goblin's death, and thus he's responsible for his best friend hating him. That's a lasting consequence that he has to face through those movies. Andrew Garfield, he has to deal with the lasting consequence of Gwen dying, because if he just happened to help his friend Harry by giving him the blood that he needed, or at least trying to help Harry, whether or not it worked or not, all of Harry becoming Green Goblin is Peter's fault because Peter didn't try to help him. Peter didn't do everything he could to try and help him. He didn't help him like with Oscorp, and he didn't help him to try to find a cure to his disease. And thus, Harry was fighting that battle alone. He became Green Goblin, which eventually led to Gwen's death. So Peter's actions, or lack of actions, led to this permanent consequence of Gwen dying. That's a permanent consequence that he will have to face. Tom Holland doesn't have anything like that. He just simply doesn't have anything like that. Any conflict or consequence that he faces is either very minimal or become completely resolved until the end of No Way Home. No Way Home sees Aunt May die. And then Peter, with the help of the other Peters, send all the multiverse people back. And in the midst of that, Tom Holland's character had to go through the spell where everyone forgot about him. Now we're talking. Because now we've been giving an end of a movie and a promise of a movie of this is going to be a new age for this character. There's going to be lasting consequences from this movie for this character. There's going to be real chance for development with this character, because No Way Home leaves us off with this. His aunt has died. He is now alone. He has no family to live with. His aunt and uncle are both dead. His parents are dead. That's what we assume. We don't know that for sure, but that's what we assume, knowing what we know about the Peter Parker Spider-Man character. He no longer has family. All of the Avengers forget who he is. All of Tony Stark's tech forget who he is. All the records of Peter Parker no longer exist. That's why he needs to get a GED. That's why you see in his apartment him having GED workbooks, because he needs to re-get his high school diploma, because there are no records of him existing. So he has no family. All of the Avengers forget who he is. All of the records of Peter Parker existing no longer exist. All the Stark technology no longer recognizes him, so he's completely on his own there, which means he needs to make a homemade suit, thankfully, finally. And his best friend and woman he loves has completely forgotten about him and have no idea he exists. Now we're talking. Now we're talking something finally for this character to grow with. There's a real chance for growth here. Not only is there an opportunity to get back to classic Spider-Man and get away from all the Iron Boy Jr. stuff, but this is an opportunity to get back to classic Spider-Man, introduce a completely new set of side characters, because the side characters from the old movies, from his trilogy, were kind of getting played out. But also a chance for this character to finally have some consequences to live with long term. And thus, how will he react to all those consequences, and how will they change him? Specifically, how does living alone change him? How does no one remembering him change him? How do all of his past experiences that only he remembers change him? How does his aunt no longer being there to support him and love him changing him? How will he be different in Spider-Man Brand New Day than he was in Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home, and Spider-Man No Way Home? How has this man changed, because he is no longer a boy? How has he changed? In saying all of that, let me go into what my fears are for Spider-Man Brand New Day. So I talked earlier about how I was going into this movie, or I'm going into this movie, knowing as little as I possibly can. That said, there are things I know about this movie. First of all, I know Zendaya and Jacob are both in this movie. That is a big red flag to me right away, because I feel like their mere presence is regressive for this movie. It's regressive in a few senses. Practically, it's regressive because we're just going back to old characters from the old movies, right? Instead of moving forward with new characters. One of the things I was looking forward to the most with the ending of No Way Home was, okay, the next set of movies featuring this character, they're going to get to introduce an entirely new supporting cast. And with that, there was going to be an opportunity for us to get to know new characters and get to really appreciate how these new characters would, help shape this next part of Peter's life. But the mere fact that they're in this movie, it feels regressive, and it feels like, even if, okay, we talked about how there wasn't a lot of conflict or lasting conflict between him and these characters. If they introduce that now, it feels like they're trying to correct past mistakes, right? For me, I would just rather them move on. I would rather just be introduced to new characters altogether, and how Peter deals with that for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, I thought when Peter left the cafe with Jacob, or with Ned and Michelle Jones, not knowing who he was, but they were still friends and they themselves got into the university, I thought, okay, this is him making the decision. These two are better off with me, and I'm going to live with the pain of losing them, but they're going to go on to a better life. And I feel like their presence in this movie is only going to go back on that. No matter what they do, it's only going to go back on that. And thus, it feels like, again, he's not going to have any lasting consequences. It's like this consequence, even if it's existed for a few years in the time of this movie, if they're fixed, again, this is a thing of lasting consequences being erased for this guy. And I don't want to see that. I want to see this character actually live with something that he can't possibly change. You know, both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield have multiple things, um, have multiple examples of that, where Tom Holland has almost no examples of that. And this is the one opportunity that they had to do that. But my biggest fear is that by the end of this movie, both of them are going to remember him and he's going to have his friends back. And if they do that, I'm going to probably dislike the movie. I'm going to be straight up with you. I'm going to probably dislike the movie because it's just another consequence that this character does not have to live with, even though we were promised that he actually would have a lasting consequence to live with. But also, I want to look at this from a kind of a real life practical point of view. How many people are friends with their friends from high school for life? You know, how many people have their friends from high school remain in their lives after high school? Like, I don't know how much longer Brand New Day is taking place after No Way Home. In real life, it's been like 6 years, 5 or 6 years. But in terms of the movie, I don't know how long it's actually been in terms of the actual movie. I'll find out when I see it. That's one thing I don't know. I don't know if it's supposed to be 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 4 years. I don't know. I'll find out when I see it. But even if it's 2 or 3 years, one of the realities of life is 2 to 3 years after high school, the majority of people that were your friends in high school are no longer in your lives. That's just one of the realities of growing up. And so not only am I not looking forward to Zendaya and Jacob being in this movie because I feel like it's regressive for the movie, but I just feel like it's it's just not practical. It's just not realistic. You know, even high school sweethearts, 2, 3, 4 years after high school, tend to not really be in contact with one another. So, my biggest red flag about this movie heading into it is that I know Jacob and Zendaya are in the movie. I don't like that. I don't like that for multiple reasons. And I really do feel that there's almost nothing they can do with their presence that will justify them being in this movie as a good thing. I almost think there's nothing they can do to make it a good thing, to be completely honest with you. But we'll find out. I'm also aware that the Punisher and the Hulk are in this movie. And, you know, this is just another Marvel movie, huh? Just another MCU Spider-Man movie. When are we going to get to see Tom Holland's Spider-Man movie be in a movie where he's the only hero? This is one of the biggest problems with the shared universe, especially the shared Marvel universe when it's as gigantic as it is. Almost even in movies where the title characters, where it's very clearly their story, very few of them actually have movies where they're the only hero in the movie. And they're working completely by themselves. We've never had a Tom Holland Spider-Man movie where he's the only hero in the movie. And again, we're not getting that here because the Hulk and Punisher are in this movie. And even if they're in conflict with him, they're not going to be in conflict with him for the whole movie. They might be in conflict with him for the first couple acts, and then by the third act they're going to be on his side. Like we have all seen enough of these movies to know how it goes. So again, this is just another MCU movie with Spider-Man as the lead character, but when are we going to get to see a Spider-Man adventure with Tom Holland where he stands completely on his own? We're probably never going to get that because this was the opportunity to do that because all the Avengers forgets that he exists. So if there's ever a time in the MCU where you can do a Spider-Man movie and not have any MCU characters join the movie at all, this was it. Because none of them remember that he exists. And yet the Hulk and Punisher are in this movie. Why? To me, again, there's almost nothing they can do with them that will justify it being a good decision. So those are two major red flags I have heading into this movie. The fact that Michelle Jones and Ned are in it, and the Hulk and Punisher are in it. And it doesn't matter if he has conflict with all of them, because all of those conflicts are likely to be resolved by the end of the movie. All of those characters' presence in this movie is regressive and bad for me. And there's almost nothing they can do to make it good. I feel like the only one of those characters that has even somewhat potential of being a decent thing is if Ned became a criminal in this movie, and I have no idea if he's supposed to be a criminal in this movie or not. Again, I haven't read any rumors on the movie. I haven't seen any footage. I haven't read any reviews. I haven't seen any trailers. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do with these characters. But let's say Ned becomes like a criminal and he becomes a villain, and maybe he gains like a villainous identity like Hobgoblin or something. I don't think he's going to, but let's just say that he does. That could be interesting because they'll finally have conflict with one another, and only Peter would remember that Ned was Ned, where Ned would have no idea who Peter was. You can maybe do something interesting with that, but only if Ned stayed that way permanently. Only if Ned stayed that way through the entirety of the movie and the entirety of movies going forward, where Ned is just a villain now and him and Peter are constantly at odds. If Ned was a villain temporarily and then became best friends with him again, then to me, like it's not interesting because it's just another consequence that's not permanent, right? But if Ned was to become like the Hobgoblin and be a permanent villain, that could be like the one thing that saves that. But I know they're not going to do it. I know they're not going to do that. What they would do is if Ned became Hobgoblin, it would be like Spider-Man 3, where eventually Harry and Peter make up. Where at least in those movies, they had an entire movie of conflict before that. It's really two entire movies of conflict before that because the entirety of Spider-Man 2 and the first two acts of Spider-Man 3, right? And then Harry died at the end of Spider-Man 3, so it was still a lasting consequence. They never really truly made up. They're not going to do that with Ned. They're not going to kill him off for sure. But they're also, they would just have Ned be a villain for like half a movie and then they would turn him good. So, even that, I have no faith in them that they would do the actual interesting thing and just make Ned a villain permanently, which I will admit right now, if Ned is in this movie as a criminal and they turn him into a long-term permanent villain that refuses to make up with Peter or never remembers Peter and he's just a villain from this point on, that could be interesting. Could, not guaranteed, but could. But I know they're not going to do that, so it's just a red flag for me. That being said, I'm going to end this intro here because we're coming up on 1 hour and I did not want the introduction to be this long. I'm going into this movie wanting it to be good. And I'm going into this movie with an open mind. And I'm going into this movie to give it a chance. I'm going to the movie, guys. Like, I have my doubts, to be honest. I'm not, like I said earlier, I'm not hyped and I'm not like losing sleep over excitement. And I've never been a huge fan of either the MCU or Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man until No Way Home. No Way Home to me showed that Tom Holland could be a great Spider-Man. He has the tools to be a great Spider-Man as a character, like his version of the character, I mean, has all the tools to be a great Spider-Man. And Tom Holland himself was very good in No Way Home in terms of his performance. So I think No Way Home proved he could be a great Spider-Man. But I have a lot of red flags heading into Brand New Day. I really do. And but all that said, I think No Way Home proved that he could be a great Spider-Man. And I have a ticket to go see this movie. So I'm going into it. I'm willing to give it the chance. And of course, I want it to be great. Nothing would make me happier than seeing this movie tomorrow and then coming on here and raving about it afterwards. I don't think that's going to happen. My prediction is that's likely not going to happen. But if it does, I'm going to be extremely happy. And because of how good No Way Home was and his version of the character was in that movie, there is the chance that Spider-Man Brand New Day could be great. And with that, I have seen Spider-Man Brand New Day. I just got home within the last half hour and I am finishing what I started last night. This is going to be the spoiler-free part of the review. As long as you see the word spoiler-free area at the bottom of this video, you are fine. You do not need to worry about spoilers here. I will not spoil the movie for anyone who hasn't seen it. So if you want the spoiler-free part of the review, this part's for you. When you see the words beware spoilers at the bottom of this video, that's when I will be using spoilers to help discuss my review. Now, even in the spoiler area, I'm not going to go through the movie beat by beat. It's not going to be that type of review, but I will reference parts of the movie and sections of the movie to help with the points that I'm making. But this part is the spoiler-free area. So let's get to the spoiler-free part of the review. Was this movie good? That's the very first question. Was this movie good? Yes. Yes, it was. It was a good movie. If that's all you need to hear, then you're done. You're good to go. But there's two truths that I feel is accurate with this movie. There's this movie on its own in a bubble. You take this movie and you place it in a bubble where it exists on its own, and then there's this movie where it exists with the rest of the Spider-Man movies that Tom Holland has started as part of like a four-movie story, if you will. This movie for me is better in the bubble. So this movie existing in a bubble on its own as its own singular individual experience, that's where this movie is its best. A lot of its weaknesses, in my opinion, come from when it exists as a part four of a four movie story. To me, that's where all the weaknesses of the movie start to come in. This movie is not a perfect movie. There are going to be a ton of people that overhype this movie because it is really good. And this is a must see in the theater. This is not the type of movie that you wait for at home because this movie is going to be so much better on the big screen and it's going to be so much better part of an audience. So, as part of an audience. So, if you can go see this and experience it with an audience on the big screen in the first probably 2 weeks of its release, that's the time to see it. I do feel the movie will lose steam eventually. I do think that over the course of the next 2 weeks, you're going to see a lot of people overrate this movie because on its own, it is a really good experience and it's a good theatrical experience. So everyone who goes out to see it in the next couple weeks is probably going to overrate it slightly, but it is a great theater experience. Um, this was the first movie where I think it's called I don't know what it's called, but it's where it uses the side walls as a second and third screen. I'm so out of the loop because I don't go to the movies very often anymore, but whatever that's called when they use the side walls as extra parts of the screen, this movie incorporates that, and not every single scene does that. There are most of the movie, I would say, where they're only using a single screen at the front, but there are a lot of action sequences and even dramatic sequences where they use all three walls as this kind of large 360 almost like experience of the scene. Which I thought at first was distracting because I haven't seen a movie like that before. Um, Back when I went to the movies, we had 3D goggles instead of this, 360 wall experience. But I thought it was a bit distracting at first, but I got used to it pretty quick, and by the end of the movie, I no longer found it distracting. But the point is, this is a really good theater experience movie. I feel like people that wait to see this at home are not going to appreciate it as much. And that's how I feel for myself. I feel I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I probably would have had I waited for this movie to come out, which is what I do with 99% of movies nowadays. I feel that seeing a movie in the theater with an audience kind of ups your experience, right? And it kind of makes you appreciate the movie more than you would watching it alone at home. Um, that said, that can also paint a picture of the movie that's not entirely accurate because part of the high review was the experiences, which is what I'm getting back to saying that I feel like some people are going to overrate this movie in the next couple weeks. But it was a great theater experience, and this movie existing in a bubble is really good. I feel like Tom Holland probably put on the best performance he's ever given as Peter Parker's Spider-Man in this movie. I feel that he has progressively gotten better in each movie that he's done. I thought he personally was better in Far From Home than he was in Homecoming. I thought he was much, much better in No Way Home than he was in Far From Home. And this movie, I feel, was his singular best performance as the character, um, as an actor, not necessarily how the character was written or anything like that. That didn't hurt, but I feel that as an actor, his portrayal of the character was the best in this movie. And I feel that one thing this movie accomplishes more than anything, I thought No Way Home was very close to accomplishing this by the end of it, but Tom Holland has finally definitively become Spider-Man. It only took him 7 movies to do it, or 4 singular movies to do it, but he has finally done it. He's finally become the definitive Spider-Man. And I don't mean like better than Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield. That has nothing to do with what I'm saying. But he has definitively become Spider-Man. He has shed that Iron Boy Jr. label. He's shed the Spider Boy label. He's shed this, he's a version of Spider-Man. He has finally definitively become Spider-Man. I feel that if nothing else, that what this movie accomplished was Tom Holland has finally grown into being Spider-Man. And you'll know exactly what I mean once you see this movie. But any sort of, you know, feeling of him being more of an Iron Boy than Spider-Man or being, this specific type of Spider-Man, all that stuff feels gone by the end of this movie. It just feels like he's finally definitively become the true Spider-Man. And again, that has nothing to do with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. It's just he finally feels like he's embodied the character. That has nothing to do with any other portrayals of the character. It just feels like he's finally embodied the true spirit of this character. And that's what I mean by, if nothing else, this movie feels like Tom Holland has finally become just Spider-Man. And that's that's a great thing about this movie. And going forward, I have no hesitations about, watching Tom Holland play Spider-Man. Now, that said, there were creative things that I would have done differently, and I'll get into that more in the spoiler section of this review, but there were definitely things I would have done differently creatively. Um, Also, I talked a lot about earlier in my thoughts heading into the movie about character development and the sort of lack of character development of Tom Holland as the character. And while I feel like he's definitively stepped into embodying this character of Peter Parker Spider-Man at this point, I do still feel that there hasn't been a ton of character development in the actual character itself. It it feels more like he's just grown in front of our eyes. It feels like we've watched a boy go from being a boy to a man, but in terms of his character, there is no deep study character of this version of Peter Parker. There's nothing really to study because he hasn't really changed all that much as a person from the first time we met him until now. He's just gotten older. And that's how I would describe the character development of this version of Peter Parker is that it's just that he's gotten older and he's gotten wiser and he's discovered himself, and that's that feeling of he's gone from being a boy to a man. But it doesn't in terms of who he is as a person and the decision making that he makes, how he handles situations he finds himself in, there is no real difference between this version between the Peter Parker in Brand New Day and the Peter Parker in Civil War or in Homecoming. He's just older. That's it. He's older and he's experienced a bunch of events, but he hasn't really changed as a person. If you look at this character, it's not that type of character where there's where he's gone through things that has shaped him and molded him and changed him as a person. He's not really designed that way, and that's the faults of earlier movies as opposed to this movie. Because I feel that the earlier movies, like Spider-Man Homecoming, is the most guilty of this, did not do the things it needed to do necessary to show actual progression of a character because he's always kind of known the right thing. He's always kind of known what the right thing to do is, and he's always kind of known what the right way to act is. And again, this is the faults of the earlier movies because the earlier movies were designed that we cannot absolutely not make this character unlikable in any way. From the very moment we've been introduced to Tom Holland as Spider-Man, Marvel Studios has been extremely careful to make sure that we do not dislike this character, that we do not find faults in this character, and that there's nothing we can criticize about this character, both in terms of how they show him, as Spider-Man, but there's nothing that we can be like, hey, I dislike this guy, because if I dislike this guy, then I can't cheer for this Spider-Man. So they've been super careful to make sure that we do not dislike this guy, that we have to like him from the very second we meet him. But because he was designed that way, he already knew all of the lessons he needed to learn to become the man that he is in this movie in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Again, he just feels older and wiser. That's it. But he hasn't really changed. The decisions he makes in this movie are still the same same types of decisions he would have made in the earlier movies. It's just that he's, older and wiser. And that a lot of that comes off of just Tom Holland himself being older and have grown as an actor. I think a lot of that is just in Tom's portrayal of the character, not in the writing of the character of itself, because in the writing of the character itself, I don't feel there's a ton of progression here. I don't feel that there's a lot of, you know, changes here. And I'll go back to the Lethal Weapon analysis that I brought up last night. You take Lethal Weapon 1 and you take Lethal Weapon 4. Compare Sergeant Riggs in Lethal Weapon 1, that's Mel Gibson's character, and Sergeant Riggs in Lethal Weapon 4. They're completely different men. Completely different men. But over the course of those four movies, we've seen this natural progression that takes him from point A to point B. So by the fourth movie, yes, he is a completely different man, but it was natural. There was a natural progression over four movies in terms of how the events that he experienced shaped him, how, the relationships around him shaped him, how, growing within his profession and the bonds he was making with the people around him changed him as a man. But you go and you watch those two movies, they're two completely different characters. characteristics remain throughout all four movies, but the man that those characteristics belong to is completely different. And that's not portrayal in those movies. That's the writing of the character. There's a natural progression over those four movies that just simply doesn't exist from Spider-Man Homecoming to Spider-Man Brand New Day. This version of Spider-Man has always known the right thing. He hasn't really changed. He's just gotten older. I can't really beat that in more without going into spoilers, but all of the progression of the character, sort of say, is more in Tom Holland's portrayal, and that's a compliment to him as an actor because he has grown as a man and he's brought that growth into his portrayal of the character. But the writing of the character, I brought up last night how I was worried that they still weren't going to show a ton of character progression, and they really haven't. That's the one flaw of this movie, in my opinion, because this movie has the core Spider-Man message in it. And what's the core Spider-Man message? It's with great power comes great responsibility. But what does that term mean? With great power comes great responsibility. That term is not said in the movie, by the way, in that Brand New Day, I mean. But what does that term mean? It basically means be a good person when no one else would be a good person, and even when it's hard for you to be a good person, be a good person anyways. That's what with great power comes great responsibility means. And that message is in this movie. That is the core message of this movie. Be a good person, even when other people wouldn't be a good person, and even when it's hard for you to be a good person, be a good person anyways. That is the core message of this movie. And in saying that, this movie thematically does not offer anything new that we haven't seen in other Spider-Man movies, or in other Spider-Man stories in general, whether it's the video games or the comic books or any of the cartoons. That message, that core thematic message of what almost every Spider-Man story tries to be, it is in here, but in saying that, it fails to really give us something new in that sense. So those are the weaknesses of the movie, and I'll get into more of that when I get to spoilers. The last thing I want to say in the spoiler-free part of this video is the action and the sequences with Spider-Man in the suit, by far and away the best actual Spider-Man sequences that we've seen in a long time in a Spider-Man movie, in a long, long time. That was a lot of what was going around before this movie came out, was how they were really focused on trying to improve the action sequences, improve the cinematography when Spider-Man was in the suit, improve what Spider-Man's doing on screen and how the camera is recording him doing those things, and the movement of the camera itself in conjunction with the movement of Spider-Man, and how they really wanted to up the game in terms of these action sequences when Spider-Man was in suit, and I definitely feel they accomplished that. This may have the best Spider-Man action in a live-action Spider-Man movie. It probably does. And in that sense, I know that was a big focus for them, and I do think they accomplished that. All in all, all in all, I would say this movie is more good than bad, but it was not perfect, and I will get into more details in the spoiler part of this review, which I'm going to go into now. But if I had to give it a score, I don't like to do scores the day of seeing a movie because I need to think about it for a bit. I like to sit with it for a bit and think about it for a few weeks at least. I'm probably not gonna go see this movie in the theaters again, but I am saying right now I'm not committing to definitely not going again. I I have an open mind to possibly going to see this movie again. I haven't done that in several years, gone to see a movie twice during its theatrical run. I don't remember the last movie I did that for, but it's been a long time. I didn't do it for No Way Home, but that's a lot of that has to do with COVID. And at the time, I had to see No Way Home in a drive-in. I did get to see No Way Home in a theater again during the Spider-Mania re-releases, but I digress. I haven't gone to seen a movie twice in its initial theatrical run in several years. I don't know if I'm going to go see this one again or not, but I'm not committing to not. But in terms of giving it a rating, I do feel like I need to think about it for a bit. I know this is so unprofessional for reviews. Like they reviews really kind of have to come up with a score fast, but for me, I'm not that type of moviegoer. I really do like to think about it for a while, and I probably do want to see it a second time before I rank it. But I will say this. I went into this movie having a definitive top four for Spider-Man movies out of the 10 Spider-Man movies that have come out, where I felt that the four at the top were the definitive four, and then the six below them were all noticeably below them. I don't think I like this movie enough to put it into that top four to knock any of them out. My initial reaction now, which I reserve the right to change in the future, is to put it at fifth. To say it's better than the other six, but not as good as the top four. And I will reveal that list of 11 at the end of this video. And I'm thinking I'm going to put this at number five. I'm thinking number five. So that's the last thing I'm going to say in the spoiler-free section of this video. Overall, I think it's a movie worth going to see. Overall, I think it's a really good theater experience. Overall, I think Tom Holland has definitively become Spider-Man. And overall, I think this movie is more good than bad, but it's not perfect, and people are going to overrate it a bit. But to me, it was a really good movie. I enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to see it. And the spoiler section of this video is starting now. I'll give a countdown. After that, we are in spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, go watch the movie. And if you're still interested, you can come back for the spoiler discussion afterwards. So spoilers start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we are now in the spoiler territory, so this is your last warning. This is the spoiler section of the review, so I will now be using spoilers to discuss the review going forward. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to bring up is that this movie has more Spider-Man than Peter Parker, but it's kind of like the Batman. Um, I know it's weird to like say this, but I feel that this movie kind of took inspiration from The Batman by Matt Reeves, starring Robert Pattinson, in the sense of this movie is more Spider-Man than Peter Parker. But the longer the movie goes on, and this movie is too long, by the way, that's one of the criticisms. I do feel this movie is probably like 15, 20 minutes too long. But the more this movie goes on, the more Peter Parker is incorporated into the storyline. So while this movie sees Peter in the Spider-Man costume more than outside of the costume, Peter Parker gets more and more incorporated into the storyline throughout the movie, just as in the Batman. Bruce Wayne's in the Batman costume more often than he's out of it, but the longer the movie goes on, the more Bruce Wayne starts to get incorporated into the storyline. Exact same thing happens in Brand New Day. It's mostly Spider-Man and less Peter Parker, but the longer the movie goes on, the more Peter Parker is incorporated into the storyline. And by the end of the movie, it feels just like another classic Peter Parker, I'm going to be a good person story, and I'm going to teach someone else to be a good person. And that's the big spoiler I want to get to right now, is that I talked about how this movie has that Spider-Man theme of be a good person even when you don't want to be a good person, and when other people wouldn't be a good person anyways. And in No Way Home, there's that moment where Tobey Maguire's Peter teaches this to Tom Holland's Peter, and Tom Holland's Peter wanted to kill Norman Osborn. He wanted to kill the Green Goblin, but Tobey Maguire stopped him, and just by giving him a look, Tom's version knew that he was wrong, and he was wrong in trying to do that, and he spared Green Goblin's life. Well, in this movie, Jean Grey is about to kill the head of Damage Control, and because the head of Damage Control killed her sister, so she wants to kill this guy for revenge, but Peter in this movie teaches her that that is wrong. And he teaches her that she is a good person and that she should not do that. And that even though she wants to kill this man, it is the wrong thing to do that. And she, in order to be a good person, needs to let him live. So that lesson that Toby's Peter taught Tom's Peter in No Way Home, Tom paid that forward in this movie by teaching that lesson to Jean Grey. And the way they did that in the movie was they had, I don't need to go into how they did it. Essentially, Jean goes into Peter's mind and she experiences something he experienced, and thus she learns the lesson. But it was his presence and it was his experience that she learned that lesson through, and he paid that moment forward. So Peter Parker was super important to the storyline as the movie went on, because if Spider-Man was someone else other than Peter Parker, he might not have been able to save that man from Jean Grey. So Peter Parker definitely became more and more important as the movie went on. In terms of the shared universe, I thought the Hulk and Punisher were both used very well in this movie, and as well as they could be used. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the shared universe concept in the sense that in every single movie we've seen Tom Holland be Spider-Man in, he's sharing the screen with other heroes, but I feel like the only hero he's really sharing this movie with is Punisher, and not on a huge scale, because this is really very much a Spider-Man story. I thought Punisher was used correctly, and he was used very well, and as well as he could be in this situation. I still probably would prefer to not have him involved, but because this is a shared universe, and because they did want to give this movie a bit of a smaller feel by having a smaller, you know, quote unquote street level character. I don't like the term street level character. I think it's very stupid. I don't like that fans use that term, but that is exactly what they were going for by having the Punisher be the main supporting hero in this movie. But I thought Punisher was used effectively. He was very important to the storyline of this movie. I feel like, if anything, the thing they accomplished the most with Hulk and Punisher is you couldn't just substitute them with other characters from the Marvel Universe. I feel like in earlier movies, that was a huge problem that Marvel had with the Spider-Man movies. In that the characters that they were using, they could have probably swapped them in and out for other characters. Um, I feel like in this movie, Hulk needed to be Hulk and Punisher needed to be Punisher, to the level that No Way Home needed Doctor Strange to be Doctor Strange. I feel like No Way Home and Brand New Day use the greater MCU cameos the best. Um, no Way Home with Doctor Strange and Brand New Day with Hulk and Punisher, because I feel that Punisher needed to be Punisher. He couldn't just be substituted with a different character, and Hulk needed to be Hulk. He could not be substituted with another character. Because of the storyline with the inhibitor, with Hulk, Hulk needed to be Hulk for that. For the moment of when Jean Grey loses her control over Hulk, and Hulk going into savage mode. So Spider-Man still had to fight Hulk, and you had that callback to the comics where Spider-Man calms down Hulk with his voice, and by reminding him that they're friends, there was that very famous comic callback in this movie. I feel like Hulk needed to be Hulk, Punisher needed to be Punisher, and they were used very effectively. And Punisher's in the movie a little bit more than Hulk is, but I thought Punisher was really good. I thought the Punisher was one of the better parts of this movie. I really do. He was used very effectively, and so was Hulk. Jean Grey was a pretty good villain. I will say this, the beginning of the storyline was very reminiscent of Marvel's Spider-Man with Mr. Negative. Very reminiscent of the first movie or the first video game of Marvel Spider-Man on PS4 with Mr. Negative, to the point that I actually thought they were just doing Mr. Negative. I know the Tom Holland movies love doing references to those Spider-Man games with the White Spider and the selfie and Far From Home. And the beginning of the Jean Grey storyline, by the end of it, it was completely different from the Mr. Negative storyline, but the beginning of it and parts of it was very reminiscent of Marvel's Spider-Man. To the point that I actually thought, damn, they were going to have the head of damage control during the movie. I thought, oh, okay, so the head of damage control is Mr. Negative. He's already hinting that he's the one behind the mind control, and this is Peter Parker trusting someone who's supposed to be a community leader or a mentor or an important figurehead, just like in the video game, but he's going to find out he's Mr. Negative and he's the one behind all this mind control stuff in the first place. Um, they definitely, I feel like they did that as kind of a nod. It did turn out to be Jean Grey in the end, and Jean Grey was played by Sadie Sink. So by the end, the storyline went in a completely different direction, which I was a fan of because I thought that they differentiated themselves enough from the video game. But make no mistake, the start of that storyline is very, very similar to the video game. But I thought Jean Grey was effective in the writing of the character. I was not crazy about Sadie Sink's performance as Jean Grey. I thought she was okay. I thought the dramatic moments involving the character, like this is a big spoiler, but there is the beware spoiler side. But the scene of her and Marissa Tomei, I thought was well acted. I thought the scene of her and her sister in the park was decently acted. But pretty much the rest of it I thought was kind of weak. I thought when Sadie Sink was getting angry, she was very over the top in a way that was, it wasn't doing it for me. Um, Keep in mind, this is the first time I've ever seen Sadie Sink. I've never seen her act in anything else before, but I was not crazy about her acting in this movie, and I'm not crazy about her being Jean Grey going forward, because obviously she is Jean Grey, so she's going to be playing Jean in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for a long time, and I'm not like overly crazy or excited about it, to be completely honest. Like, that's a pretty major casting for X-Men in the X-Men universe, and I'm just not I'm not like crazy ecstatic to see her play the role again. So I'll just say that and I'll leave it at that. The one thing I want to say about the head of damage control and Peter trusting that guy in this movie is that, again, it shows a lack of character development in Tom Holland's Peter Parker, because how many times is he going to trust people that he shouldn't trust? Like, at what point does he learn the lesson of, I need to be um, I need to be suspicious of everyone until they prove to me I shouldn't be suspicious of them, rather than I need to trust everybody until they give me a reason to not trust them. I mean, we've seen this over and over and over again with this character. In Far From Home, he trusted Mysterio when he shouldn't, and that was a mistake. In No Way Home, he trusted Norman Osborn when he shouldn't have, and that was a mistake. In this movie, he trusted the head of damage control when he shouldn't have, and that was a mistake. How many times is this going to happen with this guy? At some point, he's got to learn his lesson, right? I mean, that would be character development. I'm going to be suspicious of everyone until they give me a reason not to be, rather than I'm going to trust everyone until they give me a reason to be suspicious of them. Like, you can't tell me that he's that naive to keep making this same mistake over and over and over again. And that's, again, this is what I meant of this movie. The faults of this movie exist when it's part of the four movie arc. All of its greatness is the movie itself in a bubble. All of its faults are the movie when it exists in a four-story arc. And one thing that I think kind of is a little bit of a letdown in that for me creatively is that one of the things I thought they had the potential to do, which I don't think they really can do anymore after this movie, going into Doomsday and Secret Wars. One of the ideas I've had, and I can't say I came up with this idea completely on my own because I've seen some rumors of this online, but with the rumors I've seen online, one of the ideas I had for Tom Holland's Spider-Man was, what if he's swayed by the fact that Doctor Doom looks exactly like Tony Stark? So the end of Doomsday, like throughout Doomsday, we hear that there's like a mole on Doom's team, that, or like Doom has a mole in like the Avengers, that he has someone who's actually on his side that used to be on our side, but we don't know who it is. And then at the end of the movie, they reveal it to be Tom Holland's Peter Parker. And we go into Secret Wars with this big twist of Tom Holland Spider-Man is on Doctor Doom's team because he has the same face as Mr. Stark, right? I don't think they can really do that anymore. Because if they try to do a twist like that now, then they're pretty much just giving up and saying this guy's just going to be naive for life. Because, I mean, at some point, this character's got to be like smarter than that, right? I feel like if they try to do that twist now, it won't be this incredible, amazing reveal, dramatic reveal that they're going for. It'll be more of a like, are you kidding me? He's falling for this again? You know what I mean? And in saying that, would you really be surprised if this version of Peter Parker falls for something like that again, whether it's in Doomsday and Secret Wars or in the fifth Spider-Man movie? Like, come on, man, when's this guy gonna learn how to be suspicious of people? Um, I want to talk about Ned and Michelle, because I talked about them a lot in my thoughts going into this movie. Um, They were, in my opinion, overused, but not hugely. I think Michelle was slightly overused. Zendaya was in this movie a little bit more than I didn't want her in this movie at all. Before I get to the overall point of her being in it a little bit more than I wanted, let me say this. I understand what they were going for having her in this movie. But even after seeing the movie, because what I said last night in the earlier section of this video is, I feel that there's nothing they can do with these characters that will justify them being in this movie. And I'll say this, in a box or in a bubble where this movie exists solely by itself, I understand why they're there. But in an overall arching story of what happened before and what can happen after, my preference would still be that they were not in this movie at all. I still, even after seeing the movie, feel like I would have preferred if they were not in this movie at all. I understand their involvement for dramatic stakes. They were in this movie for dramatic stakes for Peter Parker Spider-Man to have some personalized drama while this storyline with Jean Grey was going on. I understand that. But my preference would have been for them to not be in this movie at all. That being said, throughout the movie, I felt like Michelle was being overused. They did a very successful tease on a rooftop where Michelle looked like she remembered who Peter Parker was, but then we found out that she was just taken over by Jean in that moment. And I thought that was very effective. Zendaya acted out that scene very effectively, even very strongly. She had the entire theater convinced that she actually remembered Peter in that moment, but it turned out that it was just Jean possessing her. Again, I said this in the earlier part of this video, Zendaya is the strongest actor of these three. You take Tom, Jacob, and Zendaya. Zendaya is far and away the strongest actor of the three, and it's not even close. And I think in this movie, she proved that again. She is the best actor of the three. And anyone that says that she isn't, you're just lying to yourselves, guys. She is the best actor of the three, and it is what it is. I know a lot of people want Spider-Man to be the best actor, but he's just not. He's not better than Zendaya. She is the best actor of that three, and that's just how it is. And props to Zendaya because she had everybody in the theater convinced in that moment that she really remembered who Peter was, even though it was Jean Grey that had her in that moment. But I do think overall Michelle was overused in this movie. I think that especially when Peter takes her to Punisher's house to keep her safe, I think I think she was overused in the sense of they kept going to back to scenes of her and Peter a little bit more than they needed to. You could have easily cut those scenes down or cut a couple of those scenes out completely. Definitely cut them down at least though and shaved some time off of them. But I understand what they were going for, but I do feel that she was overused. And again, my preference would be that she wasn't in the movie at all because ultimately what they did is they they didn't really pick a direction with her and Peter in this movie. At first, they were doing the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 thing of Peter and Gamora, where Gamora is like, look, the woman I used to be but no longer am was in love with you, but I'm not that woman. That woman died, and I'm not her. Like with Gamora, we know from Infinity War, Thanos killed Gamora, but in Endgame, they use time travel, and Gamora is brought back in the timeline through time travel, but the original Gamora still died at the hands of Thanos. To get the Soul Stone or whatever stone it was. I'm not a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't know all the Infinity Stones. Sorry, I think it's the Soul Stone or whatever. I don't remember. But when Gamora died at Thanos' hands, the endgame version of Gamora was the same person from a different timeline, but that version of Gamora never fell in love with Peter Quill. So in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Peter Quill remembers this relationship with Gamora, but she is flat out like, look, I don't love you because I don't know you. They do that exact same storyline with Zendaya or with Michelle and Peter in this movie because Michelle does find out who Peter is because Michelle finds the letter that he initially wrote to her in No Way Home at Punisher's house because Peter naively leaves that letter at Punisher's house. She reads it. She starts to, or she reads the letter and she gets the information from the letter, and then her and Peter have a discussion because Spider-Man finally takes off his mask for her. And they do the Peter Gamora thing where Michelle is like, look, I know we have this history, but that wasn't technically me, and I'm not in love with you. So the movie was going in that direction, but they didn't commit to it because after that, they'd had a scene where Peter goes with Michelle to go see Ned as Spider-Man, and Michelle, it looks like she's starting to fall in love with him again because she already was like, oh, Spider-Man's a good guy earlier during her time with him. And then seeing him with Ned, she draws them together. And at the end of the movie, she goes to the rooftop part from No Way Home where her and Peter, like that, they chose that as their spot. At the end of the movie, we see her sitting alone there as if she's starting to remember him and she's falling in love with him again. So this is what I mean. My preference would still be that she was not in this movie because listen, if they did the Peter Gamora storyline, I'd be like, they're just ripping off Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and they're kind of plagiarizing themselves. But I would at least be like, okay, They gave closure to this storyline. This storyline now has closure. Michelle knows that her and Peter used to be in love, but she's going to go do her own thing now. But they didn't commit to that because they showed her slowly falling in love with him again, even going to the spot that they used to stay at. So again, this storyline between Peter and Michelle is not over going into the next movie, which means that once again this movie is stagnant or going regressive. And I said this earlier in the video and I'll say it again. Like, come on, how many people are friends with the people from high school for life? Like, both Ned and Michelle had moved on in this movie and Peter hadn't. We know that because of the end of No Way Home, and that's part of the storyline. But if they had them involved in this movie for Peter to get closure and for Peter to finally move on from them, I'd be like, okay, I understand their involvement. But really, by the end of the movie, Ned remembers who Peter is because they do their high five handshake, and out of muscle memory, Ned remembers how to do it. And then because of the muscle memory kicking in, all of his locked away memories awaken again, and he remembers who Peter is. He lights up, and on his face he goes, Peter, and he remembers him, and now they're going to be best buddies again. And it's such a letdown because like I said, the ending of No Way Home kind of promised us that this character was going to move on and we would get a whole new set of supporting characters and we'd be moving in a new direction going forward. But this movie did the thing I was most afraid it would do, and that was it's regressed back to Ned and Michelle, because now they're going to be characters still going forward in the next set of movies. Michelle, they can still say moves on. There is still the possibility that her and Peter don't end up together, but Ned is back in the fold now. Ned's back in the fold completely. And Michelle is slowly falling in love with Peter again. So, yeah, while their involvement in this movie works in the bubble that this movie is, and I think they were both dramatically effective in this movie as a bubble, I don't like their involvement because in the overall arching story, I wanted to see this character move in a completely different direction and move to the next phase of his life, which the next phase of his life shouldn't have been regressing back to them. It should have been meeting new people and for us to meet new characters, and we're just simply not going to get that opportunity now. And that was my biggest worry about the movie, and it exists, even though I admit that their presence was used strongly for this movie as an individual movie. But two things can exist at once. Their presence was good for this movie independently, but their presence was bad for the overall arching story. Two things can be true at once, and both those things are true. There was too much slow motion in the action sequences. It felt like a Zack Snyder movie in that sense. I thought Batman v Superman and the Snyder Cut both overused slow-mo to the extreme. I feel like Brand New Day uses slow-mo even more than those movies did. I wasn't a fan of Black Widow in this movie. I don't know who that Black Widow is because I never saw the Black Widow movie. Is that supposed to be Scarlett Johansson's like sister or comrade from training with her or something? I have no idea who that character is. I never saw Black Widow, but I was not a fan of her character at all. I thought the whole office in a pool thing was stupid. And it's just used as comedy that didn't land. And I will say this about this movie as well. Some of the humor did not land in this movie. I don't think I laughed out loud once during this movie, and the theater I was in, which was full, didn't have a lot of laugh out loud moments either. Um, then again, I'm in Canada, and Canadians don't tend to laugh as much as Americans or Europeans do, so I don't know how movie theaters around the world are reacting, but I will say this. The theater in Canada did not laugh out loud a lot during this movie. There were a couple movies where you got like a pretty decent giggle from the crowd, but there was no like major laugh out loud moments in this movie, in my opinion. But if you disagree, that's completely fine. I wasn't a fan of the organic web storyline or the use of the term organic web. First of all, let me say this. Peter Parker develops webbing powers in this movie because they're clearly doing the man spider thing, and I'll get to that in a second. But because anyone that's seen the 90s cartoon, the Spider-Man cartoon from the 1990s, they did that storyline in that show where Peter's powers takes over him like a mutation and he turns into a giant spider. They call it Man Spider. And they're clearly setting that up for probably that to happen during Doomsday or Secret Wars or the fifth Spider-Man movie. In one of those movies, whether it's Doomsday, Secret Wars, or the next Spider-Man movie, it is very likely that Peter is going to turn into Man Spider in that movie. He did not turn into it in this movie. I was not a fan of the movie actually using the term organic web, which it does. In the movie itself uses the term organic web. I think the term organic web is a stupid fan-made term that I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of fan-made terms making it into these movies like organic webbing or street level characters. Like I don't like those types of fan terms getting introduced into the movies themselves. And they don't use the term street level character in this movie, but Black Widow says, oh, there's big potatoes and there's small potatoes. You're small potatoes, kind of alluding to that street level thing. But the AI that Peter uses, and Peter does use AI in this movie just like he uses it in Homecoming, which again, I'm not a fan of the whole tech thing. Like it is what it is. I guess all modern Spider-Mans have tech, but like I hated that Peter used AI in this movie, but it is what it is. But the AI in this movie actually refers to the webbing as organic web. And I thought that was very stupid. I hate that. I hate that they called it that. But then there's also this really stupid moment where the AI fires the web shooters off of Spider-Man's suit and says, organic web and web shooters cannot be used simultaneously. And my instant question was, why? Why can't he just use the web shooters? He clearly prefers using the web shooters, which he does because he uses an inhibitor to keep the mutation at bay so he can use his web shooters instead of the quote unquote organic web throughout the movie. But I was like, why can't he use both at the same time? That's stupid. It essentially worked that way because at the end of the movie, Spider-Man has his web shooters broken and Damage Control has all these anti-Spider-Man weapons. And the only way for Spider-Man to combat them is to take off his inhibitor and to let the mutation completely take over his body. And thus, he has to gain control of the mutation in order to effectively use his new organic powers, his new organic spider powers, to win the fight. I understand that, and in that sense, they kind of pulled it all back together in an effective way from a writing standpoint. But one, I hate that they called it organic web in the movie, but two, I hate that he didn't become Man Spider in that moment because what I thought was going to happen was he was going to become Man Spider in that moment completely, and then maybe what would happen is he would win the fight, but then to get control of the beast, he would figure out a way to crawl back to the inhibitor and put it on while being Man Spider, and then become regular Spider-Man again. And then he would have this sort of like thing he needs to keep at bay going forward, kind of like the Hulk, right? But they didn't do that. He had him completely take over his mutation, and they wanted to just focus on the lesson that he needed to teach Jean. But it means one of two things going forward. Either number one, he's going to turn into Man Spider in the next movie, and then he's going to have to get a cure for that. And he'll become normal Spider-Man again, where he needs to use web shooters. 'Cause that's what happens in the '90s cartoon as well. He eventually does calm the mutation down, and eventually does go back to being normal Spider-Man with web shooters and everything like that. That's what I hope they do. If they go the other route and they just make it that he's like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man now and he shoots webbing out of his body and everything like that, I feel like that's really not something I'm a huge fan of. So I do hope that this is an ongoing storyline that gets corrected, because I hope that he eventually does turn into Man Spider, and then either Dr. Connors from this universe or the Hulk or someone is going to fix his mutation altogether, or maybe the X-Men fixes his mutation altogether. And anyways, I'm getting lost in a tangent here, but as of now, Spider-Man simply just has these abilities going forward. He simply has the ability to shoot webs and has enhanced spider powers because this mutation is now just fully part of him. So going forward, that's just Spider-Man now, which I'm not a fan of. The last two things I want to bring up. The second last thing I want to bring up is this. Spider-Man and Hulk use inhibitors throughout this movie to inhibit the Hulk from coming out and inhibit the spider mutation from taking over Spider-Man's body. And he uses this inhibitor to battle Jean Grey to take away her powers. And I'm like, so this is just No Way Home all over again, in a sense, because Spider-Man is battling his villains by taking away their powers. And in No Way Home, it had the storyline purpose of we're going to take away their powers so when they're sent back to their universe, perhaps they don't end up dying at the hands of their fight with Spider-Man, because they're now in control of themselves, they're in control of their own minds, they don't have these powers anymore, and perhaps their fate will turn out differently. In this movie, it was, I need to take away Jean's powers, because if I can't take away her powers, I can't beat her. And it's like, okay, are we going to just do this in every Spider-Man movie now, where he fights his villains by taking away their powers? You know, this is Superman 2. Like, that's what Superman does in Superman 2. He takes away Zod's powers to effectively beat Zod. Can Spider-Man just figure out other ways of beating his villains? I mean, does he just have to take away everybody's powers to beat them now? Can we just have a movie where he beats his villains just because he outsmarts them in a different way, or he outmaneuvers them, or he's a better fighter than them, or he just, defeats them in a more creative way? I thought the inhibitor thing was just a very convenient plot device that I was not a huge fan of. Again, this movie's not perfect. The last thing I want to say is this movie did not bring up Toby or Andrew very much. In fact, there was no mention of Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man at all. There was no mention of Andrew and Toby as a collective at all. And whenever they showed flashback footage, because they do show flashback footage quite a lot in this movie, which is a negative in my opinion. I thought the flashbacks were used effectively here and there, but the overuse of flashbacks is just, it can be kind of lazy writing. But anyways, that's just like the debate would be, okay, well, what do you replace the flashbacks with? How do they show what they need to show without using the flashbacks? And it's like, my answer to that is, I wasn't the one writing the script, so I don't need to answer that question. But the overuse of flashbacks can be very lazy writing. But anyways, they do show flashback footage of No Way Home, but they never showed Toby or Andrew in any of those moments. And they have this moment where Michelle is asking Peter questions about, himself when he's Spider-Man. Like, not Peter. She's asking Spider-Man questions about himself. I would have thrown in an extra line in there earlier in that conversation, be like, hey, do you have any brothers or sisters? And then Spider-Man could be like, I have two brothers. And she goes, oh, where do they live? And then he could say something like, oh, they live really far away. You know, something like that. Like, oh, I have two brothers, but they live really far away. Like, everyone would have got what that meant, and it would have been a nice little nod to Toby and Andrew. The only nod that they do in the movie is when Spider-Man is figuring out how to shoot his new webbing. He says, "Organic web. Peter too had that. He was cool." So they did mention him. They did mention Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man that way. In the post-credit scene, there is a one post-credit scene at the end of the movie. It's not in the middle of the credits. It's at the very end of the credits. Ned, throughout this movie, has developed this Spider-Man tracking app. And we see Punisher use that app to help find Spider-Man in the final act for the final battle. But we know Ned has this Spider-Man tracking app. And at the end of the movie, they have this post-credit scene where we go into the app itself and we see Spider-Man in New York. But we also hear that there's another Spider-Man sighting, another Spider-Man setting, and it goes off of Earth, past the moon, into dark space, and it locates Spider-Man there, alluding to a second Spider-Man might be coming to Earth, or a second Spider-Man might be out there in the cosmos, which means that in Avengers Doomsday, we're very likely to see Tobey Maguire. So the two references to Tobey slash Andrew, both of them were to, the one was to Tobey when Spider-Man said, "Organic web, Peter too had that, he was cool." And then the post-credit scene where the Spider-Man tracking app tracks a second Spider-Man and it's somewhere out in space. That's very likely a nod to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man coming in Avengers Doomsday this Christmas. But the last thing I want to say on that is, I mentioned Tom Holland has definitively become Spider-Man at this point. Is he the best Spider-Man overall? I would say this, to anyone that's going to claim he is after this movie, one, I think you're overrating the movie slightly. Two, the guy's had 7 tries at this. He's had 7 tries at this. I mean, if it took him his 7th time playing the character to become the best Spider-Man, it's like, okay, good for you, but you've had 7 tries. Toby's had 4, Andrew's had 3, you know, and like their fourth and third try respectively were very small roles, like smaller than your role in Infinity War, most likely, or like maybe even at best. But the point I want to make is this. I don't think Tom Holland has killed my excitement for seeing Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield again. In fact, has this movie made me want to see them less? No, it's made me want to see them more for a couple reasons. Number one, I think the several year break from No Way Home to Brand New Day, the fact that they weren't shown in Brand New Day, they weren't referenced a ton in Brand New Day, and they weren't in Brand New Day, and this was a very overall more successful than not adventure for Tom Holland on his own, I would say that makes me more excited for them because I feel like the appetite to see them come back is now there again. I think heading into this movie, a lot of people were of the mindset of, if Toby and Andrew are in this movie, they're being overexposed as Spider-Man at this stage of their careers, and it's going to kill the fans' love affair with them as Spider-Man. And I understand that argument, and I think that this movie, the fact that they weren't really referenced all that much, and that their faces were never shown, even in the flashbacks, and they weren't in this movie, and it's been several years since No Way Home, I think the appetite to see them come back is there again. And absolutely, I want to see them in Doomsday and Secret Wars, and absolutely, I want to see them in Spider-Man 5 if that possibility is there. I plan to go to Avengers Doomsday for the image we see on the right. This is a fan image. This is from Reddit. And I want to go to Doomsday to see Tobey Maguire again. I want to go to Avengers Secret Wars to see Andrew Garfield again and Emma Stone again. One of the great things about Brand New Day, Gwen Stacy was not in this movie. There was a ton of rumors that Gwen Stacy would be in this movie. There was a girl that lived in the building that could still be revealed to be Gwen Stacy, but she wasn't called Gwen in this movie, and they never did any reveal that she is Gwen Stacy in this movie. So that girl could be Gwen in future Spider-Man movies, but the potential that Emma Stone could still be the very first Spider-Gwen in Avengers Secret Wars is very much alive. There was no Spider-Gwen in Brand New Day. There was no Gwen Stacy confirmed in Brand New Day by the movie itself. I want to go to Avengers Doomsday to see Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker Spider-Man be the main Spider-Man of Avengers Doomsday. I want to go to Avengers Secret War to see Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man and to see Emma Stone be the first ever Spider-Gwen. And Avengers Secret Wars, there's rumors that they want to wrap up every single storyline of every single Marvel movie in existence. Well, you need to give Andrew Garfield's character closure with Gwen. So bring back Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man in Avengers Secret Wars and bring in Emma Stone to play Spider-Gwen from another universe in that movie so that we can have that moment, that very famous moment from the comics where Spider-Man and Spider-Gwen meet and Peter goes, "In my world you died," and Gwen goes, "In my world you died." And then they can do that moment in the movie. We can fill in the blanks ourselves. We can have that moment of them maybe earlier in the movie. Maybe you have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man fighting a symbiote suit Tom, or maybe you have him fighting a symbiote suit Toby, or maybe you have him fighting a man spider Tom. Maybe he's about to lose this fight, but he gets saved by Spider-Gwen. And then maybe at the end of the movie, we have a bunch of Spider characters as part of the big climactic battle against Doom and his team. And Spider-Gwen and all of the Spider-Man and maybe Miles Morales from another universe and so on are all there, part of this battle. And then at the end of the movie, we get that closure scene of Gwen and Peter. They can have that moment where they catch each other up. They can have that moment where they say goodbye to each other. They see each other's face one last time before they go home to their universes. That's what I want to see in Avengers Secret Wars. It's the only reason I plan to go to that movie. But this right here is what I'm excited for in the Avengers movies. And hey, if you want to give me a bonus and give me these three in the next Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland, I'll take that too. Because yes, I absolutely would be down for Spider-Man 5 to be a multiverse movie. I absolutely would be down to see these characters one last time in a Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland. And would I be down for Spider-Man 5 to be a Spider-Verse movie? Yeah, I would. I thought this was a good singular solo adventure for Tom Holland's version of the character, and I feel like the appetite to see these characters is back again. Hopefully we see Tobey in Doomsday. Hopefully we see Andrew and Emma in Secret Wars. And I will leave it at that. The last thing I want to do for this video is I want to reveal what my list is for the 11 Spider-Man movies. So I'm going to pause this, write them out, and then I'm going to come back and reveal what my list from 11 to 1 is ranking the Spider-Man movies. Okay, I wrote down my list. So I have from 11 to 1. Now, I did an objective list and a subjective list. For both lists, 11 through 5 are the same. But objectively and subjectively, my top 4 change because from an objective standpoint where I'm taking my own personal biases out of it, I do think the order of the top 4 changes, but my subjective personal biases of the list has a different order from the objective part. But I mentioned earlier that I had a definitive top 4 that objectively I feel are the best four Spider-Man movies, and subjectively are also my favorite four. The order changes between those two, but the rest of them all stay the same from 11 to 5, both objectively and subjectively. So let me start with the 11 through 5, and I'm not going to take a ton of time doing this because this is already over 2 hours. But I won't go into full reviews of every single movie, or else this video will last another hour. But if your list is different from mine, that's completely cool. Feel free to put your list in the comments. But this is my list. And at number 11, I have Spider-Man Far From Home. In my opinion, the absolute worst Spider-Man movie. It is just a filler movie, and it really, in the long-term scheme of things, it's a skippable movie. It really is. The only important thing about the movie is the ending. At number 10, I have Spider-Man 3, which is an all-in-all bad movie. It's not just a bad Spider-Man movie, it's a bad movie in general. Gen Z grew up with the movie, and because they grew up with the movie, they think it's good, but it's not a good movie. It's a really bad movie. It always has been, it always will be. One thing about Gen Z is they have a really, really hard time admitting movies they loved as kids are bad movies. Spider-Man 3 is an example of that. Hey, when I was a kid, Batman Forever was my favorite superhero movie. I don't think Batman Forever is a well-made movie, guys. It's not. It's still one of my favorite movies of all time, but it's not a good movie. You guys need to learn how to do that with Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 is a terrible movie. It's okay if it's one of your favorites, but it's a terrible movie, and it's number 10 on the list. Number 9, I got Spider-Man Homecoming. This movie to me has so many problems that do not have the time to list them all here, but for me it's number 9. The movie is one of the safest movies ever made, and it's the safest Spider-Man movie ever made, and I don't say that as a compliment. That movie did the more damage to Tom Holland's version of the character than any other movie he's been a part of. It's a better movie than Far From Home is, but it's not a good movie. It's done long-term damage to his character, actually. Number 9, Spider-Man Homecoming. Number 8, Spider-Man. I'll remind you, I'm born in 1990 and I was 11 years old when this movie came out, yet I'm not blinded by nostalgia goggles. For me, the first ever Spider-Man is coming in at number 8. It has a 10 out of 10 sequence from when Peter Parker runs down the stairs of his aunt and uncle's house to go to the wrestling match to win money to buy a car to face Mary Jane, up until the point where he chases Uncle Ben's murderer, and the murderer falls out the window at the abandoned warehouse or the abandoned dock and breaks his neck. That sequence of the movie, all of that is 10 out of 10. Everything else about the movie is pretty much laughably bad. I have the first Spider-Man movie at 8. If there was a short movie of Peter Parker going to that wrestling match and then chasing Uncle Ben's murderer, it's 10 out of 10, and that's the best sequence in all of the Spider-Man movies to this day, but the rest of the movies is laughably bad. Number 7, I have The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It is the most overhated movie in the Spider-Man franchise. It's overhated and underrated. It has aged a lot better than people perceive it to be. It is not nearly as good as the first Amazing Spider-Man. And it is a movie with a lot of problems, but it is overhated and it is a bit underrated. It's aged a lot better than people give it credit for. I have it at number 7. Number 6, I have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Not nearly as good as the first one, but a really, really solid movie. I would say 7 through 11 are movies with issues. I would say 8 through 11 are movies that are bad. 7 is a movie with issues. This is where we get into the good ones. 6, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Number 5, I'm putting Spider-Man Brand New Day here. It is number 5 for me. It doesn't dethrone any of the top 4, but it is close. If there were some tweaks done to it, it could have got to that level, but for me, it is the best Spider-Man movie outside of the top 4. Now, number 4 through 1, I'll do the objective list and then I'll do the subjective list. Objectively, at number 4, I have The Amazing Spider-Man, probably the most underrated superhero movie of all time, and a movie where Peter Parker has lasting consequences and has actual character progression from beginning to end. And it is my personal favorite portrayal of the Peter Parker character on screen. So I have The Amazing Spider-Man at 4 objectively. At number 3 objectively, I have Spider-Man No Way Home, the most fun Spider-Man movie ever made, the biggest pop culture Spider-Man event there ever will be. There will never be a pop culture Spider-Man event like that again. And a movie that was made for the fans from beginning to end. Spider-Man No Way Home comes in at number 3 for me. Objectively, the second best Spider-Man movie is the second Spider-Man movie ever made, Spider-Man 2. It is the best of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies far and away. It's not even close. The train sequence of Spider-Man fighting Doc Ock is still probably my favorite Spider-Man fight, even after watching Brand New Day. Spider-Man 2, it's not a perfect movie, but it's in terms of Spider-Man movies, it's the closest you can probably get to making a perfect Spider-Man movie. It's very good. Objectively, the best Spider-Man movie is still Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I will say this. It is easier for animated movies to be great than it is for live action movies to be great when it comes to superheroes, because live action movies are a lot more limited than animated movies are. That being said, I still think even from a writing standpoint, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is objectively the best Spider-Man movie ever made. Now, subjectively, my top 4 is the same top 4, but it changes. And I'm rating them subjectively just in my personal liking of the movies and which of the 4 movies I'd rather watch with a group of people right now that were interested in seeing these movies for either their first or second time. Number 4, I'm putting Spider-Man 2. Sorry, it's my least favorite of the 4. Number 3, I'm putting Into the Spider-Verse. Number 2, I'm putting No Way Home. And my personal favorite, it doesn't have to be yours, is still The Amazing Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield is still my favorite Peter Parker Spider-Man, and I hope to see him and Emma Stone in Avengers Secret Wars. And I hope to see both of them, or at least Andrew, show up in Spider-Man 5, Tom Holland Spider-Man 5, or even Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse, which will be the next movie rated in this list. And we'll see where Beyond the Spider-Verse lands. But there you go. My full 2 hour and almost 17-minute review of Spider-Man Brand New Day. You're a trooper if you sat through this entire video. I don't know how many people will sit through this entire video, but you're a trooper if you're one of them. Thank you so much for watching. I love Spider-Man, and this movie, Spider-Man Brand New Day, was better than I thought it was going to be, and because of that, I am happy. Thank you so much.